They were forced to read an ancient text, believing it would open a vault of gold. It did, but the words also unlocked a cage, releasing a prisoner buried alive for 170 years. As the creature takes its first breath, a deafening roar shakes the mountain. A wall of snow and rock buries the valley. The gold is worthless. The exit is gone. They are trapped with the thing they set free. The air in the Oregon logging camp was thick with the smell of wet pine and diesel. A constant damp cold seeped into everything, turning the rutted mud paths into a thick slurry. Jake, 42 years old and looking older, moved with the steady, exhausted rhythm of a man trying to disappear into his work. His face was weathered, covered in several days of salt and pepper stubble, and his worn, dark brown canvas jacket was pulled tight against the chill over a faded red flannel shirt. He finished loading a heavy log onto the truck bed, the motion mechanical. He was never truly alone. In the cab of his battered pickup, a magnificent 5-year-old German shepherd watched him. The dog's name was Wolf. His thick coat was a rare silver and gray, and his posture was one of calm, patient vigilance. He was not a pet. He was a sentinel, his intelligent eyes tracking every logger that moved near his truck. The grinding sound of the machinery faltered, replaced by the unfamiliar hum of a clean sedan engine. The car looked absurdly out of place, its rental sticker still gleaming on the windshield. A young woman emerged, perhaps in her mid-20s. She wore practical hiking boots, but her glasses and the focused academic intensity in her eyes suggested she belonged in a library, not a logging camp. She spotted Jake and walked directly toward him, holding a worn, leather-bound book to her chest. Jake stopped working, his body tensing. Wolf rose silently in the truck's cab, his attention fixed on the stranger. "Are you Jake?" the woman asked, her voice clear. Jake just stared, wiping grease from his hands onto an old rag. "My name is Sarah," she pressed on. "I'm a historian. I'm looking for a guide." Jake shook his head. "Not interested." "Please," she stepped closer. "I checked the forestry records. You're the only person to enter the Cascade Restricted Zone in the last 5 years and come back out. I need that experience. I need you to take me to Sorrow's Peak." Jake's blood ran cold at the name. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice flat. "This journal," she began, but was cut off. A new sound joined the camp's rhythm, the heavy, aggressive crunch of off-road tires. A black 444, reinforced and tactical, rolled to a stop, blocking the camp's only exit. 4 men emerged. The leader, Caney, wore modern tactical gear that made him look like a soldier. His eyes were cold and focused. He wasn't looking at Sarah, he was looking at Jake. "It's been a long time, Jake," Caney said, his voice devoid of emotion. Jake's shoulders slumped, the exhaustion of the last few years catching up to him in a single, bitter rush. Wolf, sensing the shift, let out a low growl that vibrated through the truck's cab. Caney's gaze flickered to Sarah, then to the ancient journal in her hands. His expression sharpened. "Plans change. Give me the book. You're coming with us." His men fanned out, their hands resting near their holsters. The loggers backed away, sensing a danger they wanted no part of. Jake knew this script. He knew he couldn't win a fight, but he could run. His eyes darted to a tall, unstable scaffold of freshly cut timber nearby. He looked back at Caney. "It's yours?" As Caney nodded for one of his men to step forward, Jake lunged. He didn't attack. He threw his entire weight against the scaffold's main support. The structure groaned in protest. Timbers shrieked, and then the entire thing collapsed with a deafening roar of splintering wood and metal, crashing down between Jake and Kane's team. Shouts erupted as Caney's men dove for cover. "Run!" Jake yelled, grabbing a stunned Sarah by the arm. Wolf was already out of the truck, a gray streak moving toward the tree line. Jake didn't hesitate. He pulled Sarah past the machinery, toward a narrow, hidden trail he had prepared months ago. They vanished into the dense, dark Oregon forest just as the first angry shouts emerged from the chaos behind them. The old pickup truck roared to life, its tires spitting mud as Jake spun it around, heading for the logging road. Sarah barely had time to buckle her seatbelt, clutching the precious journal to her chest. In the extended cab behind them, Wolf stood with his paws on the center console, his silver and gray fur bristling, his eyes fixed on the mirrors. "They're right behind us," Sarah yelled over the protesting engine. Jake's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I know." Caney's black reinforced 404 slammed into their rear bumper. The impact sent a painful jolt through the truck, and Sarah cried out as her head snapped back. A metallic scraping sound filled the cab. "He's trying to push us off the road." "He's trying to stop us," Jake corrected grimly, fighting the wheel as the truck fishtailed on the wet gravel. Another 444, this one a dark green, pulled up alongside them, attempting to box them in against the steep mountain drop-off to their right. Jake stomped the gas, and the old engine screamed, pulling them slightly ahead. Suddenly, a series of sharp cracks echoed from behind. It was not the sound of automatic fire aimed at them, but the distinct report of a high-powered rifle. Sarah flinched, covering her head. "He's shooting at us." "No," Jake said, his eyes scanning the cliffs above them. "He's shooting at the mountain." As if summoned, a shower of rocks and debris rained down on the road just ahead of them. Jake cursed and swerved violently, the tires screeching as he narrowly avoided the small landslide. The maneuver cost them their lead. Caney's truck was on them again, ramming their bumper repeatedly, trying to disable the vehicle. Jake knew he couldn't win this way. He wrenched the wheel hard to the left, turning onto an overgrown trail that was barely visible, marked only by a fallen tree. Branches screeched and snapped against the truck's sides as they plunged into the dense forest. The path grew narrower, the air darker. For a few moments, the only sound was their own crashing progress. Then the heavy rumble of Caney's pursuit vehicles followed. The trail ended abruptly. A solid wall of granite and boulders rose before them, slick with moss. It was a dead end, a narrow box canyon. "No!" Jake whispered, slamming his fist on the dashboard. Sarah looked back, her face pale. The sound of Caney's engines grew louder, closer. "Jake, we're trapped." In the back, Wolf was not watching their pursuers. He was restless, whining low in his throat. The 5-year-old German shepherd was sniffing intently at the air near the rock wall. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, his attention pulled from the tactical nightmare. Wolf moved to a dark shadow between two massive, leaning boulders. He pushed his nose into the gap and whined again, louder this time. The lights of Caney's 444s flooded the small clearing, blocking the only exit. The engines idled, a low, menacing thrum. Caney stepped out, his tactical gear immaculate. "It's over, Jake. Nowhere left to run." Jake saw the gap. It was barely shoulder width. "Get out of the truck, now!" "What?" Sarah panicked. "We're cornered." "Trust me. Trust him." Jake grabbed his pack and the journal from her lap. He pointed to the narrow opening Wolf had found. "In! Go!" Wolf scrambled through the dark crevice without hesitation. Sarah, seeing no other choice, followed, her jacket catching on the rough stone. Jake went last, forcing his shoulders through the tight passage. They heard Caney shouting in frustration. They were safe. The narrow gap was a natural tunnel that Caney's vehicles and his men in their bulky gear could not immediately follow. Sarah leaned against the damp rock on the other side, gasping for breath. "How did you know?" Jake rested a hand on Wolf's broad, silver-gray head. "I didn't. He did?" He looked back toward the muffled sounds of the engines. "That bought us time. He'll have to drive 20 miles to find a way around that ridge. Let's move." They walked for hours, climbing through the unforgiving terrain of the Cascade Wilderness. The gap Wolf had found led them onto a treacherous goat path that wound steadily upward. Sarah, though fit, struggled with the altitude, while Jake moved with a grim, practiced endurance. Wolf, the 5-year-old German shepherd, scouted ahead, his silver and gray form a ghost against the dark rocks. Yet he seemed troubled, frequently pausing to look back, as if sensing they were being herded rather than escaping. The path ended at a wall of sheer rock, seemingly another dead end. "The journal says the entrance is hidden by a curtain of stone," Sarah said, breathing heavily as she consulted the old pages. "It must be here." Jake ran his hands along the rock face. "It's not a curtain, it's a fissure." He pushed aside a curtain of thick, ancient ivy, revealing a crack in the stone barely wide enough for a person. They squeezed through one by one. The change was instantaneous and profound. The biting wind that had hounded them on the mountain path vanished, replaced by a dead, cold stillness. The air was heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang. A thick, unnatural fog clung to the ground, obscuring their view. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice sounding muffled. Jake pulled his canvas jacket tighter. "This isn't right. No wind. It feels preserved," Sarah finished, her eyes wide with awe. As they moved forward, the fog thinned, revealing the town of Sorrow's Peak. It was not a ruin of rotted wood and collapsed beams, as 170 years of Oregon weather should have made it. The buildings were intact, their windows dark and unbroken. A rusted weather vane stood perfectly still. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. It was a town frozen, held captive by a power that defied nature. Wolf pressed hard against Jake's leg, his entire body trembling. The dog's usual calm confidence was gone. He let out a low, distressed whine, his silver-gray fur ridged along his spine. "It's just as the journal described," Sarah said, her academic excitement overriding her fear. She walked down the silent main street. "The church. It's supposed to be this way." She found it at the end of the street, a grim stone structure. "The journal says the real sanctuary is below." Jake followed her, his hand never far from the knife on his belt. "Sarah, we should leave. This place is a tomb." "Not yet." She found a heavy iron ring in the floor behind the altar, and with Jake's help pulled it open. A set of stone steps descended into blackness. Jake turned to his companion. "Wolf, watch!" But Wolf would not follow. The magnificent German shepherd stood frozen at the top of the stairs, refusing to put a paw on the first step. He paced frantically, his claws clicking on the wooden floor. He was not guarding. He was terrified. Jake and Sarah descended into the crypt. It was colder than the town above. In the center of the damp stone room sat a heavy iron cage, large enough for a man, its bars thick as an arm. Beside it, on a stone pedestal, rested a single, large book, bound in dark, cracked leather. "The prophet's book," Sarah breathed, reaching for it. From the top of the stairs, a sharp, desperate bark echoed into the crypt. Wolf was not growling, he was pleading, a sound of pure warning. Sarah, her fingers brushing the ancient leather, ignored him. The frantic sound of Wolf's barking echoed from the church above, a sharp, desperate plea that hammered at the silence of the crypt. But Sarah was mesmerized. Her fingers grazed the dark, cold leather of the prophet's book. A new noise joined the barking, the heavy crunch of boots on the stone steps. "Well, well," a cold voice snapped, the sound unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Looks like you found the prize." Jake spun, pushing Sarah behind him. Caney stood at the bottom of the stairs, flanked by two of his tactical-geared men. Caney's eyes ignored Jake, locking instead onto a massive, circular stone door set into the far wall, sealed with thick iron bands. "The vault?" Caney breathed, his greed palpable. His gaze then shifted to the book on the pedestal. "And the key." "Sarah, step away from that," Jake ordered. Caney smiled, a chillingly empty expression. He raised his handgun not at Jake, but aimed steadily at Sarah. "The historian, how convenient. Read it." "Read what?" Sarah stammered, her eyes wide with fear. "The pedestal, the inscription." Caney gestured with the weapon. "It's the mechanism. It opens the vault. Read it, aloud." Jake's muscles tensed. He measured the distance, the two armed men. They were trapped. "Do as he says, Sarah." Trembling, Sarah aimed her flashlight at the ancient text carved into the stone. She began to read, her voice shaking as the strange, guttural words filled the crypt. At first, nothing happened.
Breathe.
Wolf's barking from above grew into a desperate frenzy. "Keep reading," Caney commanded. Sarah continued, her voice rising. A deep, grinding sound vibrated through the stone floor. With a heavy groan, the thick iron bars on the large cage in the center of the room began to retract into the floor. Simultaneously, the circular stone vault door began to rotate. "Gold!" one of Caney's men cheered, stepping toward the opening vault. But Jake was watching the cage. Inside the now open enclosure, a figure moved. It was a man, or what was left of one, desiccated and skeletal, draped in the rotted rags of 19th century clothing. The creature sat up. Its eyes snapped open, revealing 2 pits of cold, glowing blue light. This was Gideon. Gideon rose to his feet. He was impossibly tall and thin, a dried husk of a man. He needed sustenance. "What is that?" the mercenary nearest the cage stammered, raising his rifle. Gideon was unnervingly fast. He crossed the room and placed one skeletal hand on the mercenary's chest. The man did not scream. He gasped, his skin tightening, his hair turning gray, then white. A visible energy, like heat haze, flowed from the soldier into Gideon. The man collapsed, his body shriveling, his uniform hanging loosely on the mummified frame. The second mercenary panicked, the sharp crack of his rifle echoing uselessly. The bullets passed through Gideon, having no effect. Gideon turned his glowing blue eyes on the second man and repeated the process. The soldier aged decades in seconds, falling to the floor, lifeless and desiccated. Gideon's form seemed to fill out. His dead skin was no longer paper-thin. He stood straighter, stronger. Caney, horrified, backed away. Gideon raised his hands. He let out a silent scream, a release of 170 years of rage. A supernatural shockwave pulsed from him, shaking the crypt violently. Dust rained from the ceiling. From high above, outside the valley, a low, monstrous rumble began. It grew louder, becoming a deafening roar. Jake grabbed Sarah. "The avalanche!" He sealed the valley. The avalanche's roar faded, replaced by the heavy silence of the crypt. The air was thick with the dust of ages and the cold aura of the creature that stood before them. Gideon, now nourished by the life force of Caney's men, looked less like a desiccated corpse and more like a thing of preserved, leathery flesh. He took a step, ignoring the cowering Caney, who was pressed against the newly opened gold vault. Gideon walked past Jake, his glowing blue eyes fixed entirely on Sarah. He stopped, tilting his head. He did not speak, but a voice, dry as parchment and ancient, scraped its way into their minds. "The blood," the voice whispered. "The blood of the betrayer. The line continues." Sarah's face was ashen. What does he mean?" Gideon's gaze was one of cold, absolute recognition. "She is of the line that bound me. She will be the one to complete the ritual." He turned his head slowly toward the 2 shriveled bodies of the mercenaries. He raised a single, long finger. With a sound of cracking joints, the 2 dead men stirred. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, their eyes hollow. They were puppets, pulled by Gideon's will. "Bring her," the ancient voice commanded. That broke the paralysis. Caney, realizing he was not the target, scrambled away from the gold and bolted for the stairs, disappearing up into the church. Jake grabbed Sarah's arm. "Stairs, now!" They ran, but the corpse soldiers were fast. They clambered up the steps, bursting out of the crypt and into the dead-still air of the church. Wolf was there. The 5-year-old German shepherd, his silver and gray coat bristling, had been waiting anxiously at the crypt entrance. His terror of the supernatural presence was still visible. His ears were flat, his body low, but his duty to protect Sarah was stronger. He planted himself between them and the stairs, a low, warning growl vibrating in his chest. The first corpse soldier emerged. It ignored Wolf, its empty eyes fixed only on Sarah. It lunged, its hand closing around her jacket, its grip inhumanly strong. Sarah screamed, stumbling. Wolf reacted. He did not bark. He acted. He launched his powerful 80-pound body not at the creature's throat, but at its legs. He slammed into the back of the corpse soldier's knees. The sound was a dull, heavy impact of muscle and bone against dead, unyielding flesh. The creature was just a puppet. It had no sense of balance. The force of the tackle buckled its legs. It crashed face first onto the wooden church floor, its grip on Sarah finally breaking. The second soldier was already halfway up the stairs. "This way!" Jake yelled. He pulled Sarah, dragging her out of the church and into the fog-shrouded main street. "The old mine entrance, at the edge of town. It's our only way out." They ran, their footsteps echoing strangely in the frozen silence. Behind them, the 2 corpse soldiers pursued, their gait stiff but relentless. Wolf ran with them, staying between Sarah and the threat, his silver and gray form a loyal, terrified guardian as they fled toward the dark, gaping maw of the mine shaft. The mine tunnels twisted, dark and cramped. Jake half-dragged Sarah forward, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive blackness. Wolf, the 5-year-old German shepherd, stayed at their heels, his silver and gray coat matted with grime, his breathing a low, anxious pant. They burst into a vast, natural cavern. The air was stifling hot and thick with the smell of sulfur. In the center of the chamber, a jagged chasm split the floor, a deep wound in the earth that glowed with an angry, red light. This was the geothermal fissure, the town's dark heart. They were trapped. The 2 corpse soldiers blocked the tunnel behind them, and from another passage, Caney stumbled into the chamber, his face pale with terror. He saw the fissure, then the approaching dead, and then Sarah. His desperation solidified into a cruel plan. "He wants you," Caney snarled, lunging not at Jake, but at Sarah. "If I give him his offering, maybe he'll let me leave." Jake intercepted him with a heavy shoulder tackle. "Get away from her!" The 2 men crashed to the ground, a desperate, clumsy struggle. Caney was fueled by panic, Jake by a cold, protective rage. A cold shadow fell over them. Gideon emerged, his puppet soldiers flanking him. He held the Dark Prophet's book in one hand. He ignored the struggling men and fixed his glowing blue eyes on Sarah. He shoved Jake aside with effortless, supernatural strength and seized Sarah by the arm, dragging her toward the fissure. As he grabbed her, the sleeve of his ancient robe tore away on the sharp rock. On his leathery chest, branded deep into the skin, was a dark, circular symbol. Sarah, struggling against his iron grip, saw it. Her eyes went wide with a horrified realization. It was the same identical symbol embossed on the cover of the prophet's book. "Jake!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the vast cavern. "The book! Look at the brand! It's his heart! You have to destroy the book." Gideon raised the prophet's book, his other hand holding Sarah fast. He began to chant, the air vibrating with a dark power. Wolf had been cowering by the tunnel entrance, his body trembling, terrified of the heat and the unnatural presence of Gideon. But at the sound of Sarah's scream, his loyalty finally snapped his fear. He did not attack the monster, he attacked the object. With a desperate, powerful leap, the silver and gray shepherd launched himself. His jaws clamped down, not on flesh, but on the thick, ancient leather of the prophet's book. He ripped it from Gideon's grasp. The book sailed through the hot sulfuric air, tumbling end over end. It fell, disappearing into the glowing red chasm. A sound tore from Gideon's throat, an inhuman shriek of pure agony. He clutched his chest where the brand was, his body convulsed, his flesh drying, cracking, and then, with a final, silent scream, he dissolved into a cloud of ancient dust that the fissure's updraft swallowed instantly. The cavern shook. Caney, momentarily forgotten, had scrambled to his feet. As Gideon disintegrated, Caney lost his balance on the unstable edge of the chasm. He teetered for one wide-eyed moment, his mouth open, before falling backward into the fiery depths. "The town is collapsing," Jake yelled. Rocks rained from the ceiling. He grabbed Sarah. "Wolf, come." A large piece of stone grazed Wolf's flank, and the GSD let out a sharp yelp, stumbling. But Jake urged him on. They scrambled back through the mine shaft, the ground heaving beneath them. They burst out into the pre-dawn light just as the entire valley of Sorrow's Peak collapsed inward, consumed by the earth. They stood, gasping for breath, covered in dust, watching the curse be buried forever. The deepest loyalty is often the quietest. It is not found in loud declarations, but in a silent promise, an unspoken vow that says, "I will not let you fall." Jake and Wolf live by that promise every single day. If that quiet strength resonates with you, we would be honored if you'd like this video and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Sharing their story helps us grow, and we invite you to continue this journey with us. The next part is ready, waiting for you right on the screen.